Hello and welcome to the Raw review here on Wrestling with Regret. And before I go any further, mazel tov to Becky Lynch and Seth Rollins on the birth of their child. The show begins with Randy Orton cutting a promo on Bray Wyatt, talking about how he's a bad man, he's got no moral compass, he broke that years ago, and he's going to look the devil in the eye and say that he is the most evil son of a bitch on the planet. This feels very similar to what Braun Strowman said about Bray Wyatt in the run-up to their swamp match at Extreme Rules earlier this year. The Firefly Funhouse shows up on the screen and Bray wants to play a game show that is. It's called Let's Get Randy. He's got a wig on and a jacket, and the prizes are the crucifix and the rotting carcass of the friendship frog puppet, which Alexa Bliss smashed with a hammer 2 weeks ago. I'll tell you what, the frog puppet's selling the hammer a lot better than the ladies in the War Games match. After some messing around with the puppets as contestants, Bray finally gets serious and spooky. Orton's had enough and he wants a match with the Funhouse version of Bray here tonight, and Bray accepts, and that's where the opening segment ends. You know, I feel the build for Orton and Bray tonight is a bit lacking, specifically because there's no Alexa Bliss. They kind of explain it away in like one line in Bray's part where, you know, she was so, I guess, frightened or kind of like nervous around Randy. She's not here this week, but I think her not being there kind of hurts the build, and we'll get to in the main event when they wrestle a match. I'll explain more why. In preparation for the women's tag title match at TLC, Asuka takes on Shayna Baszler one-on-one tonight for the first time ever, which sounds really exciting, but temper your expectations. Before the match, though, we see the champs in gorilla position, and Nia's trying to hype Shayna Baszler up. They're talking about what they're going to do to Asuka and then to Lana at the pay-per-view, how they're going to make her ugly, and Shayna says her back's going to look like her front, and her front will look like her back, and then Nia goes, so she's going to have boobs on her back. Who's writing this? There's some good technical work in the ring with these two, but the story is taking place on the outside as Nia and Lana begin to fight. Lana jumps off the steps and into Nia's arms, like kind of a powerbomb style, but Lana counters it into a Hurricane Rana. Nia face plants on the announce table. As that's going on, Asuka just rolls up Shayna and wins the matchup. So Shayna's lost 3 in a row now for her team. They are really dead set on protecting Nia Jax here. I would have loved to see them do more with Shayna and Asuka in this first time meetup here, and not to be the case. Hopefully down the line they can give them time to like expand and do more in the ring and be more impressive without being bogged down by this particular storyline. I do, however, appreciate how Lana is being portrayed and that she's incrementally getting better from week to week, where first she was pretty much totally incompetent and now she's able to bust out a couple of moves here and there. We saw it at Survivor Series, we see it here in this match as well on the outside, so she's getting luckier, getting a bit better. It's an uphill climb for her, and at least that's going on, so she doesn't look like a total charity case. So let's see how they keep that moving. The Hurt Business backstage harassing a stagehand, which I'm pretty sure is all these guys ever do backstage anymore when they're not wrestling. Then we get a recap of the Drew McIntyre, AJ Styles, Miz and Morrison storyline, and then elsewhere backstage, Riddle approaches Dana Brooke and Ricochet, who are going over their tag team match later on. He's got a box of donuts, which are called Bro Nuts, looking for MVP and Bobby Lashley, but they're nowhere around, so he leaves. And then Sarah Schreiber interviews Ricochet and Dana. Why are you guys teaming together? And basically they say they have strength in numbers to fight against Retribution. We then go to the mixed tag match as Rico and Dana take on Slappy Jack and Reckoning from Retribution. Before that match, we see a promo from Retribution saying, you know, they'll expose Ricochet and Dana as failures, and Mustafa Ali saying they'll meet their end at the hands of Retribution. But of course that doesn't happen, does it? Because within 2 minutes of this match, maybe even one, you've got Ricochet diving on a slapjack on the outside. That allows for Dana to hit like a sit-out Death Valley driver onto Reckoning to win the match. Like, all right, over and done with. I guess you've accomplished beating Retribution. You're 2-0 now against Mia Yim. Really interesting contrast here because it keeps going back and forth between Ricochet and Dana like posing and being, yeah, woohoo, we did it on the stage, and then cuts back to Mia Yim crying because Mustafa is yelling at her again, and he's yelling at Slapjack as well. Man, who would have thought that such this indestructible force that debuted with so much hype and fear and intimidation not too long ago are just completely just devastated now. Backstage, Sheamus getting ready for his match with Drew McIntyre when Keith Lee approaches him and says, you know, quit the act. We all know you're going to turn on Drew eventually. It's a matter of time. And Sheamus then repeats what he said last week, saying, I'm going to go turn on my partner and beat him up right now. So I wasn't going crazy. Last week, I thought, did he really say he was going to beat up Drew? Maybe he was being sarcastic. I didn't know what it was, but when he repeats it, yeah, okay, that's exactly what he's trying to go for. It's time for Miz TV with special guest AJ Styles. AJ AJ talks about all the things he's going to do to Drew at TLC using the tables, the ladders, and the chairs and whatnot. And then we get this moment here where Miz and Morrison just go full force, Jeff Farmer style, on these terrible Irish and Scottish accents. And when they're pretending to be Sheamus and Drew. And then when they're done, I love that Miz says, "I was studying Liam Neeson movies." And John Morrison goes, "I was studying Shrek." I love that line there. Sheamus interrupts and has a good laugh over it, but he says if you guys talk like that in the pub, he'd beat him up real good. Then Drew McIntyre shows up to somewhat even the odds. Drew tells Styles he's gone through every other obstacle so far this year, and he's going to go through Styles at TLC. Says that people are saying that Miz doesn't have any balls, but he actually does. They're just not his original pair because his wife Maurice has his original balls, and now he has John Morrison's because Morrison's his sidekick bitch, in Drew's words. A long way to go for that diss there. So anyway, Drew and Sheamus beat up the Miz and Morrison and eject them from the ring, and Drew hucks the briefcase across the Thunderdome, and it hits like part of the staging area, the Titantron, and it knocks out one of the LED panels. So that's kind of fun to see, just Drew messing up, thousands of dollars worth of equipment and kind of spontaneously. Yeah, you love to see that kind of anarchy. So yeah, that was a segment. It was okay. Seeing Drew on Miz TV feels awfully repetitive. I feel like we've seen that a lot in the last couple of weeks, last month or so. All this did to me was just help kind of basically set up the main event, or the handicap match for later on, I should say, and do more seed planting for what's going to go on in the pay-per-view. And Miz and Morrison saying stupid shit is always funny to me on some level. Kofi Kingston takes on Shelton Benjamin next. They have good chemistry here in this match. In fact, at one point they bring up on commentary how Shelton was one of Kofi's first rivalries in the ECW revival many years ago. Please do anything you can to not remind us of that, though. Anyway, Kofi ends up winning after Shelton barely avoids a countout but eats trouble in paradise as soon as he gets in the ring. I feel like we've seen that particular finish done almost on a once-a-weekly basis now in WWE, where it's like, oh, just barely gets in the ring after like the 8 or 9 count, and boom, finisher, and then they lose anyway. Like that's starting to, I feel they're going to the well on that a bit too many times. But after the matchup, Cedric Alexander on the microphone, and he wants a piece of Kofi, so we've got an impromptu match between them. Like I've said earlier, I'm really digging Cedric's new aggressive attitude. Like watching him now is like watching a totally different wrestler than what we saw even as recently as a month or 2 months ago. At one point, Kofi hits an SOS. It does not look great, and then he jumps off the top rope for something, but he lands on his feet, and he seems to jam his previously injured leg, walks right into a lumbar check for Cedric to win. So now for 2 weeks in a row, Cedric has beaten individually the tag team champions in singles matches, even though with Kofi he's slightly protected because he did just wrestle a match minutes before that. But yeah, I think this was good stuff for all three of those who actually wrestled in this segment, the 2 matches back to back. And like I said, Cedric looking really good here. His stock is going way up for me here. When he inevitably leaves the Hurt Business, I would hope to see something kind of carry over from this new aggressive side, and I hope it can do well for him in the future. Handicap match time as Sheamus and Drew McIntyre take on Miz, Morrison, and AJ Styles. One of my top spots in this matchup here is when Morrison, with a dive to the outside, caught midair by Sheamus and Drew. They huck him behind their backs in a follow-by slam, and he lands effortlessly into one of the announced team's chairs behind the announce table. Very nice landing. You love to see it. Sheamus gets worked over for the bulk of the match here, but he's able to tag in Drew, who's a house of fire. Big run by him. He gets kicked by AJ, and when he's dazed, Sheamus tags himself back in, goes for a bro kick on Morrison, but he moves and he ends up hitting Drew, his own partner and best friend, they keep pointing that out, instead on accident. That allows AJ to hit him with a phenomenal forearm to win the match here. And so I thought it was a good handicap match for, and I think that we got some seeds planted for that possible, a seemingly inevitable breakup between Sheamus and Drew, but more on that in a moment. So backstage, Lana's very nervous about her match with Nia Jax next week when Asuka's there to give her a big pep talk and to motivate her and get her confidence up. And now that Lana's finally in a good headspace, she bumps into Nia Jax, who just stands there and shakes her head no at Lana. Elsewhere, we see Sheamus kind of nervously pacing backstage and catering. He knows, what he did to Drew, and that Drew's going to try and kick his ass, and he'll try and kick his. But, he definitely asserts that it was an accidental move. It was not intentional. But Drew goes, you know where this is going, right? And they have a stare down. They go to commercial break. They come back, and they're mid-brawl. oh, they is having fight right now, and so everyone's watching it. Pat Buck tries to get in the middle of them, one of the agents, but they decide to beat him up instead, slams him through a table as everyone's watching. I love how Drew McIntyre's got his phone, like, filming it. And so then that's where it ends, where these two are just kind of like, we're just going to laugh it off and have some pints now. You're buying, you crazy bastard. And they're friends, and friends just fight, and that's kind of what we saw there. So a couple of fighting friends, everything's good again, but I mean, you just know it's not going to be good again forever. Bobby Lashley takes on Jeff Hardy in non-title action. Before the matchup, Riddle approaches Jeff in gorilla position and says, we should be a tag team, the Hardy Bros, and Jeff's got a good laugh over it, has to go to his match. I'll tell you what, Riddle as like a PG stoner right now, we're just going backstage and just like being a kind of a, similar to RVD in 2001 essentially. That kind of reminds me of like when Jay and Silent Bob became Merry Tricksters in the Clerks cartoon, when their characters are their drug dealers in the movie. Before the commercial break, MVP gets on the apron and Riddle shows up with his bro nuts and basically evens the odds. This is a good match here between Bobby and Jeff, and it ends when Jeff goes to the Swanton, lands on his feet, and walks right into a big old spear. Lashley puts the hurt lock on him and wins. Puts a little bit extra mustard on that hold though, does not let go after the bell rings. Finally, Riddle breaks it up and MVP and Lashley leave. If they are going toward a Riddle-Lashley feud over the US title, and if like what many people are kind of predicting, they're gonna have a match on the pay-per-view, then next week's episode, they better have some real big motion in their storyline to justify that match at pay-per-view. Otherwise, I feel they should just kind of postpone it or have it be kind of like a big program cycle that runs just on Raw, and maybe with a rematch later on pay-per-view, like a month from now, but maybe too soon for TLC? I don't know. Backstage, Ramblin' Rabbit pops into Randy Orton's dressing room and tells him that Bray can't wait to see him in the ring later on. We go to that match now in the main event as Randy takes on Funhouse Bray. A couple minutes into the matchup, you've got Bray slamming Orton into the announce table, similar to what Orton does to his opponents. Then Bray grabs Byron's headset and goes, "Yowie wowie, we'll be right back." And that's probably the best blatant tossed commercial break I've seen Raw do in a long time, because at least it fits in character with Bray as the kids show host. The match itself, nothing special. Like once you strip down everything past all like the unique and interesting and compelling like gimmicks and character things you see with Bray as the Fiend or as the Funhouse thing, the matches themselves aren't really worth writing home about. But the story here isn't the match itself, it's what happens afterward, because the lights begin to cut out as Orton makes his comeback, hits the RKO, goes to the cover, it goes totally dark, and when it comes back up, suddenly the Fiend, Bray as the Fiend, is now in his place where regular Bray was, and so Orton is spooked, mandible claw locked in, and Bray's looking right at the camera and just screaming and everything as we cut to black. I felt that ending part kind of saved it, but I think that Alexa not being on TV this week really did hurt that storyline, because that's the crux of their conflict now, is that, oh, Randy Orton's found Bray's weakness. It's Alexa Bliss. And, nothing really happened to her last week. I'm not sure why she wouldn't be, unless there's some other thing that has something to do with the storyline as to why she's not there. But whatever that is, I feel that her not being there kind of hurt the development of this storyline. And maybe next week she will be back and we'll get more about that. But I felt the Alexa part of this angle, which is the crux of the angle, felt really underdeveloped this week. My grade for this week's Raw is a C-. This one felt kind of a chore to get through. There were some good matches, especially in the second and third hours, by the way. First hour, you could definitely take or leave this week's episode of Raw, but I liked the handicap match we saw. I think it was pretty well done. Kofi's arc fighting both Shelton Benjamin and Cedric, I think, worked out really well. And Lashley and Hardy was a pretty good match, even though the stakes for that particular pairing were kind of non-existent. I felt, besides those matches, though, there was a lot of repetition, I felt, in terms of how they built up certain storylines. I felt it was kind of a lateral move with The Miz and Morrison in relation to Drew and everything. And, we saw a little bit of a development with Drew and Sheamus and stuff, but we can see, brush that off because, they're friends and friends fight, whatever. But yeah, there's just a couple things here I feel like I've seen this before in the last few weeks, and I'd like to see something change as we head into the pay-per-view. But those are just my thoughts, folks. What did you think of Raw this week? Let me know in the comment section below. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.